Salutations, Jonathan. Salutations for the day. All right, you shot to fame on Britain's Got Talent when you were just 17 years old. At what age did you first become aware of your unique voice? A young man who surprised the globe in 2012 on Britain's Got Talent was just 17 years old. The voice of Jonathan Antoine was enchanted. There was a secret, though, and he kept it a secret for 28 years. At the tender age of 4, he became the target of bullying. Others hurled food in his direction. Alone, his teachers discovered him sobbing. Everything changed after that because of the diagnosis. Nothing that happened to Jonathan had to do with his weight or his timidity. Something fundamental had to have changed for him to finally understand why he had always felt different. Your heart will break at the revelation of the truth he eventually made. Chigwell, Essex, is the place where Jonathan Antoine came into this world on January 13, 1995. From the outside, it appeared to be a peaceful and privileged environment to thrive in. However, that was outside of his reality. Exceptional musical ability was evident in Jonathan from a young age. At 6 years old, he possessed perfect pitch, a quality that affects only around 1 out of every 10,000 individuals. Although he possessed a unique talent, very few people paid attention. Rather, Jonathan's school days were consumed with intense bullying, to the point where his teachers frequently discovered him sobbing in solitude. When he needed to relax, he would hum extended songs. Afterwards, his mother Julie revealed that even in his worst hours, he would compose full songs in his thoughts. His brain was performing an astonishing feat despite the fact that he was displaying symptoms of depression by the time he was 8 years old. If he heard an opera only once, he could recall every detail. Medical professionals eventually determined that he exhibited symptoms of musical savant syndrome, an inherited talent that affects less than 1% of the population. Even early, he started struggling with his weight. He began to find solace in food at the tender age of 4. He should not have been 40 pounds heavier by the time he was 5 years old. He was 95 pounds at 6 years old, which was double the norm for his age. During lunch, the children taunted him and tossed food at him. In response to their constant teasing, he sought solace in food. Jonathan weighed 154 pounds when he was 10 years old. Everything was exhausted by his mum. Nothing helped, and she had to take out second mortgages on their property to pay for treatment. Later on, doctors diagnosed him with trauma-induced hyperphagia, a disorder that causes significant weight gain and affects only around 2% of bullied children. As soon as his voice started to found out at the last possible moment. He was in the 10th grade, and his replacement music teacher, Mrs. Williams, was conducting what seemed like any other choir audition. Jonathan ducked behind the other children for cover, but as soon as he spoke, an unbelievable sound from him. He sounded like an adult tenor in terms of volume and intonation. According to Mrs. Williams's subsequent comments, it sounded like Pavarotti confined to a child's body. According to the results of that initial recording, Jonathan's voice could reach a frequency range that is significantly higher than what the average child can achieve. That he has innate vibrato, which ordinarily takes vocalists a great deal of time to study. Just a matter of weeks later, he was belting out adult-oriented solos. An audio recorder wasn't necessary for him. His voice could fill a 2,000-seat auditorium at 95 dB. Subsequently, that incident was hailed as a watershed point in the history of music education in Britain. Jonathan participated in the Stratford and East London Music Festival when he was 15 years old. He was slightly over 5 feet tall and weighed 298 pounds. He competed against 47 other singers, many of whom had extensive training in their craft. Victoria Sterling, who had performed at the Royal Opera House before the age of 17, was his greatest competitor. Singing Nessun Dorma was Jonathan's choice. Nearly 2,000 people had crammed into a space that was intended for 1,200 by the time he concluded. He was met with an over 4-minute-long standing ovation from the audience. His 98 out of 100 was the highest ever given by one of the judges, Sir David Wilcox, at the festival. He received an invitation to record alongside a prize of $2,500. Plus, he experienced cheers instead of jeers for the very first time. He was also admitted to the junior program at the Royal Academy of Music in that year. It was an unusual occurrence. Out of over 2,800 applicants, a mere 23 were selected. Jonathan was so nervous that he puked twice before his audition, but despite that, he did an absolutely fantastic job. He had the voice of a trained 25-year-old, according to his academy teacher. The school waived the annual fee after his mother demonstrated the family's financial hardship. The sum was normally around £8,000. Training took up most of Jonathan's weekends. 5 hours of singing theory, 2 hours of performance coaching, and 6 hours of singing technique. His classmates paid him no mind at first because to his appearance, but after 3 months he became the youngest student in the Academy's illustrious history to play the lead role of the magic flute. Things started to shift in 2011 when Jenny Ewington, Jonathan's high school music instructor, took a daring step. Charlotte Giaconelli, who was 16 years old, was matched with Jonathan, who was 17 years old and still weighed more than 20 stone. Jonathan lacked Charlotte's self-assurance. She adored the limelight and had been performing since the age of 8. Jenny had no idea. Jonathan has a powerful yet reserved voice, so she felt that Charlotte's commanding stage presence would be the perfect counterpoint. With only 15 pupils in attendance, they sang their first duet, A Prayer. Jenny knew she had discovered something unique even in that little area. Charlotte and Jonathan couldn't have been more different. Opera was his speciality. On a daily basis, evading human presence. She adored being on stage and had participated in more than 30 musicals by the time she was 16 years old. Their voices mingled in an unusual way when they sang together, though. Jonathan had a tenor range that extended to the 5th fret. Charlotte rose from C4 to C6 in her soprano voice. The kind of voice coupling that occurs once every generation is described by a music producer who listened to their early recordings. Although unseen by the public, there were moments of friction. Jonathan was continually being prodded by Charlotte. Before rehearsals, he would occasionally hide in the school on the occasion that he had a panic attack. Bathroom. Finding him, soothing him, and bringing him back to the music room would be her mission. Their self-assurance grew when they began to perform at community gatherings. From February to April of 2012, they performed in 23 different locations, including churches, senior homes, weddings, and even pubs. They made £50 apiece at their first paid employment, which was an Easter service at a nearby church. The next major event was their performance for 200 guests at a charity dinner at Epping Forest Country Club. Talent scouts rushed up to them after the 5-minute standing ovation. 40 additional venues were on board by April, and they were raking in £300 each performance. Schedule an appointment with them. Even though their set list had expanded to 15 songs, the prayer remained central to each performance. For what was to come, Jonathan used these mini-shows as practice. Charlotte was the one who insisted that they try out for Britain's Got Talent. Jonathan first turned her down when she told him about the tryouts in March 2012. A national television audience would likely make fun of him because of his appearance, and he didn't want that. Charlotte persisted. She inquired for 3 weeks straight. In the event that he disagreed, she threatened to audition solo. She sent in their application with 13 minutes to spare before the deadline. In her bedroom, the video was shot. On TV, Jonathan appeared frightened and barely made an appearance. The producers were mostly interested in Charlotte when they contacted, but she insisted it could be either or. The London Palladium was supposed to host the audition on April 28. To ensure Jonathan wouldn't back out, Charlotte remained at his house the night before. He had never even ridden public transport alone. Jonathan Antoine had no clue that his life was going to take a dramatic turn in 2012 when he took the stage on Britain's Got Talent. He had just turned 17. He sported unkempt hair, a plain t-shirt, and seemed completely different from the artists that often wowed the judges. What followed, though, would shock a lot of people. Simon Cowell made a nasty comment to fellow judge Carmen Electra before Jonathan had performed a word. His quip, "Just when you thought it couldn't get any worse," was recorded on camera. Intense and terrible. Furthermore, it was solely dependent on Jonathan's appearance. However, Jonathan anticipated it. When asked about it afterwards, he responded, "I don't look like a standard performer. I just went out there in my normal clothes." That was a truly memorable experience. Memorable moments from BGT's past performances. After that, The Prayer was performed. The iconic duet by Andrea Belli and Celine Dion was a potent musical performance. It wasn't Jonathan's decision. Octet member Charlotte Giaconelli and he were requested to sing it at the wedding of Jeanette Brown, his music teacher. The moment Jonathan started singing, the atmosphere in the room transformed. They had the crowd in their laps in no time. There were sobs. Simon Cowell was taken aback. The verdict was yes from all 4 judges. It was more than just an excellent performance. We achieved a major milestone. Even more shocking was Simon's subsequent reaction. Jonathan was now being compared to Luciano Pavarotti by the same man who had just insulted him. He went on to say, "You're a future star." Experts agreed with him. The vocal maturity that Jonathan exhibited in his voice was evident even at such a young age. According to them, he possessed the agility and poise of a man twice his age. Word of the performance spread like wildfire. On March 24, 2012, the audition video was uploaded. Just a few short weeks later, it had. Then 2. Views of 6 million. That TV audition quickly surpassed all others in terms of viewership. The news media throughout the world took notice. Jonathan was soon being compared to Susan Boyle by many. Pastor Vi Boscombe and other religious figures were among those who shared the video and praised the narrative. Overnight, Jonathan went from being a harassed youngster to a famous celebrity, but he had a tough road ahead of him. Jonathan had a traumatic history. He was a 280-pound bully for a long time. It was at one point in his had a psychological breakdown while in school and withdrew from society. According to his mom Tracy, he would stay indoors all the time and hide under a large jumper. So, it wasn't simply an act when he stepped onto the BGT stage. An accomplishment. That wasn't the end of the strain. Jonathan had to overcome his nerves merely to remain calm for the semifinals. Equally worried was Charlotte. To overcome his fears, nevertheless, Jonathan had learned breathing techniques. In order to steady himself before singing, he had to sit down. Caruso was another one of their performances that captivated the crowd. Simon Cowell had already said that they were his favorite act of the whole show by that moment. However, controversy resurfaced. When Simon ordered Jonathan to leave Charlotte and go it alone, it stunned everyone. Jonathan was completely unfazed. His refusal was clear. "We've come on here as a duo, and we're going to stay here as a duo," stated the musician. He was already highly esteemed before that incident. They were favorites to win the championship, but the outcome dashed their dreams. The winning couple was Ashley Butler and Pudsey, their dog. Winning spot with 39% of the vote. Charlotte and Jonathan came in second with 25 points. 8%. It came as quite a shock. They broke the hearts of their admirers. A lot of people thought that popularity had surpassed talent. Time was not wasted by Simon Cowell. He inked a record deal with Jonathan and Charlotte for £11 million the day following the finale. They debuted in September with the publication of Together, an album that would go on to top the UK albums chart. For the sake of the X Factor's live performances, Simon meticulously scheduled the release. While their performance was still vivid in his mind, he knew they had to act quickly. The news shocked Jonathan. "It's hard for me to believe that we are truly creating our own CD." The Prayer and Caruso, he added, were among the tracks that made them famous, and they were all on the CD. Its sales surpassed 25 million. Their CD lived up to Simon's prediction that it would be breathtaking. Perhaps Love, their second album, came out a year after that. Released on October 14, 2013. Such as their initial, made it all the way to number 5 in the UK. However, a shift had occurred. Rather than focusing solely on classical music, the album featured more contemporary covers. One more issue surfaced as a result of that change. The desires of Jonathan and Charlotte were diametrically opposed. Serious classical music and opera drew Jonathan. Charlotte had a preference for contemporary musical theater. The disparity between them became intolerable. For many years, Jonathan had studied classical music. At a local festival in 2010, he was even selected Best Young Musician. Alternatively, Charlotte had a theatrical background. Behind the scenes, they were struggling, but their second record was a smashing success. They announced their separation at the beginning of 2014. Maintaining an optimistic outlook was something they both pursued. In a joint statement, they expressed their excitement about returning to the recording studio. According to some in the know, though, the breakup followed months of bickering about artistic direction and song selection. Jonathan had likewise been worn down by touring. Already his health was precarious. His weight and lack of self-confidence had been constant battles for him. Per his mother, prior to BG, would rather remain indoors. He was driven to his breaking point after the show due to the overwhelming amount of press, concerts, and appearances. Suddenly, Jonathan began to suffer from panic episodes. Jonathan and Charlotte continued to work together for 2 years. Their album sales exceeded 250,000. In the United Kingdom, their first album, Together, peaked at number 5. However, the public was taken aback in February 2014. An article surfaced on the web. They were breaking up. Sony had secretly extended an unprecedented offer to them, solo contracts for both of them simultaneously. Such an offer is really rare. In June, Charlotte's album would be released, and in October, Jonathan's. Softening the blow was the goal of the joint statement. They had met in high school in 2006 and had a remarkable adventure together, but now it was obvious that they were heading in separate ways. While planning their third album with Sony, things really started to turn around. In retrospect, Charlotte claimed they had very different opinions. Not the music, not the mood, and not even the pictures. Jonathan fancied delving more into the world of classical opera. For Charlotte, musical theater was the way to go. A chasm existed. Why not go solo? Sony asked, and a month later, they had decided. Shortly after, Charlotte acted. She made her solo album debut with Solitaire in July 2014. Already in February of 2015, she had debuted professionally at the Landor Theatre in London. She Loves Me is a Broadway classic, and she played the lead role of Amalia Balash. The program aired from February 4th until March 7th. This wasn't merely a professional move for her. It was a radical change. At last, she was living her dream, performing night after night in front of an audience. Jonathan had a completely different journey. He was not bold enough to leap in. A fear gripped him. Not convinced he could pull it off on his own at the tender age of 19. It had always been Charlotte who possessed the most charisma on stage. She instilled bravery in him. Now it was up to him to find it on his own. They had achieved tremendous success. Sold more than 200,000 albums globally. A position in the top 10 of the Billboard charts for classical crossover sounds. The anticipation was demoralizing. He took a few steps back. He was in the gym. He restored health. In an effort to rediscover his love for music, he strained to recall its origins. Fans were not pleased by the divorce. News reports were negative. Words like, "she dumps him," sting. Their combination had captivated audiences. Holding on was too much for them. Solo deals were backed by some industry insiders. Many were concerned that it came too quickly. In October 2013, they released Perhaps Love, their second album, in the United States. It seemed like it was only the start, not the finish. In any case, Jonathan wasn't done yet. Tenora, a 12-song classical opera album, was released by him in October 2014. On the official chart for albums by classical artists, the album peaked at number 1. When he was just 19 years old, he became the list's youngest ever top tenor. The album's unexpected rise to number 13 on the UK pop chart is even more astounding. A new frontier was opened. He was not only managing to stay alive on his own, he was thriving. That year, one thing stuck out. Jonathan was invited to perform as a special guest at the iTunes Festival in London by Placio Domingo, one of the greatest tenors of all time. As a symbol that Jonathan had finally come, it was a respectful occasion. In 2020, Jonathan undertook his most daring undertaking to date, a comprehensive concept album. June 5th was the release date of Going the Distance. It was finished after 3 years. Worked with Grammy winner Greg Field to develop the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. This record was unlike any other. It was a 3-act play based on Jonathan's life narrative. The aria that propelled Pavarotti to legendary status, Nessun Dorma, was first performed by him. The cherry on top was a March 15th concert special that broadcast on PBS. Featuring a full choir and orchestra. Jonathan, who was formerly just envisioned as a potential performer, had become such at the age of 25. Once again he caught everyone off guard in 2024. Specifically, 33 seconds of music from Diane Warren's By Request, Book 1 of Songs, featuring 8 songs. Brief period of time. I worked with Diane Warren, who is one of the biggest names in pop music. Before Jonathan, she had written for Lady Gaga, Aerosmith, Celine Dion, and herself. In 2012, at the tender age of 17, Jonathan Antoine took the stage at Britain's Got Talent. Overweight, timid, and trembling with anxiety. The subsequent events were unexplained. All eyes were on him as he spoke. Just singing wasn't enough. It was as if he were flying. His life was forever altered by that one performance. His years of secret struggle and profound bewilderment went unnoticed by the crowd. Even then, the truth wouldn't surface for over 10 years. Jonathan revealed a previously undisclosed secret to an Australian interviewer in early 2023. His autism diagnosis was final. He was 27 years old in late 2022 when the announcement was made. It was as real as a daydream to him. It came as a surprise to those closest to him. Nobody had a clue. Not while he was becoming famous. Despite achieving 5 albums. And it was true even while he was touring the globe. However, the diagnosis clarified everything. An explanation for years of mental anguish, social worry, and perplexity suddenly became clear. The reason wasn't that. It was really clear. On World Autism Awareness Day that year, he also took to Instagram to share a message. In his writing, he detailed how the diagnosis altered his self-perception. It was terrifying, he said, but it was also freeing. Jonathan had endured seemingly insurmountable obstacles for a full 28 years. In order to grasp, too large of emotions were causing him trouble. After each interview, he felt exhausted. Particularly following his unexpected stardom, he had to fight off continual pressure and criticism. Throughout it all, he had been living in silence with autism that had gone undetected. There was an enormous and rapid response to his public admission. He confessed that this was his first public discussion of the matter, and his voice quivered in that same interview. He went on to say that it was a comfort to finally have an answer for all those trying times. Life felt even more surreal after being in the dark for so long. Less easily. He was quite direct. For all of those years, he seemed to have been blind. The suffering has always been present, out of sight of the limelight. As early as the age of 4, Jonathan was the target of weight-based bullying. Following BGT, the level of inspection merely increased. Both the fame and the criticism came quickly. Ignored was a common feeling for him. He now sees that his difficulties were symptoms of something more fundamental, and that no one had seen his autism sooner demonstrates how concealed it can be among exceptionally talented or creative people. Instead of wallow in self-pity, Jonathan chose to speak out, and not only for, as well as for other people. He started speaking out on neurodiversity and mental health utilizing his platform. As a supporter of research for pediatric brain tumors, he became involved with campaigns such as Classic FM's Make Some Noise. The impact of autism on his daily existence was something he spoke openly on social media. Not content to merely post platitudes, he went into detail about the experience. After going through it alone for 28 years, he wished he could lend a hand to those who were going through the same thing. Because of his massive audience, his statements had an impact. But that was just the beginning of his own adventure. At about the same time that he started to accept his autism, along with his body, he was transforming. Throughout his life, Jonathan had battled with his weight. He had lost roughly 20 pounds by the time he made an appearance on BGT. He underwent a radical transformation, nonetheless, in the years that followed. After joining Weight Watchers in 2013, he dropped almost 50 pounds in under 4 months. 5 stone, or about 70 kilograms, was shed and maintained off of him. Fans occasionally unable to recognize him in images because to the extreme change. However, outward appearances were not everything. It was all about achieving a sense of better health and empowerment. He had previously battled with weight loss due in large part to an untreated thyroid disorder. Everything shifted after the physicians discovered it. He had finally figured out the secret to his never-ending struggle with weight loss. He made good use of the confidence boost he received from taking care of his thyroid condition. He established a sacred daily ritual. He made a pact with himself to walk 10,000 steps every day beginning on January 12th. After that, he skipped just 2 days. He was steadfast in his pursuits regardless of his location or the tasks at hand. To the point that he would pace. Only one place to score. Walking wasn't merely a kind of exercise for him. He could finally direct his own life in this way. It was a calorie burner. It freed his thoughts. His life was organized after that. On some days, it was his sole source of self-confidence. As he went on to say, "I feel stronger and healthier than I have in 10 years. That puts him in the same boat as when he was first starting out in his profession. There are still more objectives for him to accomplish, but he is approaching them with greater focus, power, and serenity. He also experienced mental healing as a result of reclaiming his health. This wasn't merely a matter of numerical values. After years of helplessness, it was about taking action. Jonathan discovered love in an unforeseen way throughout it all. Through an online chat service, he crossed paths with Michelle Ducey, a waitress from Canada. When they first started dating, he was feeling adrift. He was still attempting to find his own sound after breaking up with longtime duet partner Charlotte Giaconelli. Michelle provided him with a sense of security and motivation. She restored his self-esteem and became his inspiration. Even his album Belief was inspired by her, and he publicly referred to her as the light of his life. Michelle frequently traveled from Canada to be there for Jonathan, despite the fact that they lived in separate countries. They attended the 2016 premiere of Florence Foster Jenkins together, which brought their relationship to the public's attention. Michelle was more than a bystander. She was instrumental in Jonathan's imaginative journey. She clearly grasped his meaning, he claimed. The psychological burden of his autism diagnosis and the pressures of his profession made that assistance all the more important. At the same time, his bond with Charlotte began to weaken. In a 2017 interview, Jonathan stated that they hardly spoke anymore, answering fans' frequent questions about whether or not they still spoke. He elaborated by saying that old friendships suffer when one is constantly working. They broke up after a meeting with Sony failed to provide a third album's worth of agreed-upon material. In due time, the record company proposed solo efforts. They deliberated for a month before making the decision, which was fraught with emotion. However, once they did, they couldn't turn back. The time has come for Jonathan to put his life's narrative into cinema. Production on a documentary chronicling his life is expected to commence in 2023 or 2024. Beyond the High Sea is a possible name for the project headed by David J. Baird. Following Jonathan as he goes from childhood solitude to worldwide fame, the story will delve into the severe bullying he endured. Filmmakers have promised unseen material from his early career as well as details on his recent diagnosis, among other things, in the upcoming documentary. Perhaps the most comprehensive depiction of Jonathan ever created. Jonathan has achieved remarkable professional success despite his many personal struggles. His wealth has been revised upward to $4 million. More than 64 million people have seen his videos on YouTube. On its own, that has generated almost $190,000 in advertising revenue. On Spotify, his music often has over 50,000 monthly listeners. On the UK classical charts, his solo albums Believe and Tenor both peaked at number 1. His classical training remained unwavering throughout. To gain recognition quickly, he did not sell his art.